conventional and the absolute teachings. So too bodhicitta. There's absolute bodhicitta, which is abiding, you might say, in the nature of the mind, from moment to moment to moment, momentless to momentless moment. But then there's conventional or relative bodhicitta, which is first aspirational, the desire to liberate all beings, establish them all in Buddhahood, and then engaging conventional or relative bodhicitta, which is taking a step towards that. So the six perfections, the practices of the perfections, the six perfections are engaging relative bodhicitta, taking us to the perfection of wisdom. So this is really, important. The doctor was doing this too. I realized I practiced Buddhism for maybe 16 years, and the translations I was using and subject to really didn't even say bodhicitta; it said bodhi mind.
Was that the Zen centers, Frank?
Basically, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And there really wasn't any emphasis on it, so I really hadn't had any of these teachings. But of course, Nagarjuna says we come to the absolute by means of the conventional. Buddhism is so profound because it's just one truth, you might say. But that elevates, if you think about it, these conventional teachings. They are the true nature of mind, but in a way that we can recognize right now with our deluded mind. So this is just really extremely wonderful. You don't have to go somewhere and become something different or have some tremendous realization and before that you're just a schlub. It's not like that at all. We are actually practicing Buddha's teachings. And he didn't give lower teachings and higher teachings. He just gave, one taste. But people have different sensitivities, different capacities, different levels of realization, different levels of faith. It said that when the Buddha taught, people with different languages could hear him teaching in their language. It's that perfect. But so the conventional teachings are, what can you say, extremely important. And yet they tend to get sloughed over somewhat with a lot of popular, and especially Western Buddhism. That's why I see some of the difficulties with Western Dharma centers, for instance, because basically we don't have the idea of merit. When you hear the teachings on realization, then how do we come to realization? By the accumulation of merit, by the accumulation of wisdom, and by direct recognition. Guru Yoga, blending your mind with the enlightened mind of the Lama. So this is very helpful. Because we don't have this idea of accumulation of merit. And I think that kind of explains the struggles of Western Buddhist centers as opposed to Asian Buddhist centers. If you notice in America, Gaura Pache's students that have ethnic sanghas, basically, whether they're Vietnamese, whether they're Chinese, whether they're Taiwanese, whether they're Tibetan, they have this idea, it's culturally inculcated, of course, of merit. There's some benefit to them for participating in a Dharma center. But in the NGs, the Western Americans, it's not like that at all. We tend to have a more really narcissistic kind of viewpoint of all these things. Well, I can practice at a center, maybe I don't have to, I can practice on my own. They don't realize the tremendous benefit if you're supporting anything that is affecting so many people. And also as an example, there's so much for us to learn, and I can say from my own experience with, in Western Buddhist Center, there was a lot that you didn't learn, and this is actually kind of sad, because the idea that we can somehow skip over relative bodhichitta and, just come to some sort of enlightened state, and that's all there is to it, and that's the highest, and therefore I'm good. It's like that. It just completely misses the point and the profundity of it. The Buddha's time, he attained that highest state of the viharas, the temples of Brahma. Neither perception nor non-perception. To an uneducated mind, that can seem like the great liberation, but it's not. You can stay there for eons, it said. And somehow he had enough wisdom from his previous lifetimes that he recognized that this was not enough. It was not it. I think he had such tremendous aspiration for what? For bodhicitta. He was looking for the end of suffering, and he wasn't going to be fooled or tricked or bought off for some lower benefit like remaining in bliss for 1 billion years. The purity of his aspiration is what has led to 2,600 years of Buddhism, even when it's stumbling around. So this accumulation of merit, we have this idea, in our own cultural ways. I just drove by some sort of evangelical church today, and it looked, first of all, it was kind of bizarre because it looked like brand spanking new, looks that way anyway, but it looked like a big flying saucer had landed. It was unusual architecture. But you see this with the Christian churches. They have this idea that this is a benefit. I'm doing this for others out of love. I'm going to plug into that. I'm doing it for myself and my family and everything. But the idea of coming together to do that, there's a recognition of that. But maybe it's just that Buddhism is new and we're uneducated in it. And also, Americans have a way of kind of glomming onto something for their own purposes. You've heard me joke about, I read about some, naked fight yoga in Hollywood or something. There's always something going on, These things just get kind of corrupted. And that's no slam against Hatha yoga, but it's just what Americans do. We take something, we get really excited about it, and then, it sort of becomes part of the woodwork, but it doesn't really have a driving force to it. That's kind of sad. Today I was hearing about people trying to organize some activities, and they were concerned that the word dharma is strange. So you don't want to use that with the population, rather than use something like mindfulness. It's like we're trying to trick people into something. And I always think it's like, you have a tremendous disease. Somehow you happen to come across a doctor who says, I have this medicine. This medicine will cure your disease completely. And it's one thing for the patient to say, well, I don't know that medicine and I can't pronounce it and I don't have really confidence it's going to work. That's one thing for the patient. But for the doctor to say, you know what, I'm not going to give this to you because it's kind of hard to pronounce. And besides, there's this other one that you won't have any kind of questioning about. It won't cure the thing completely, but you'll feel better for a little bit. And we call it aspirin, So we can't shy away from the fact. In Pata Rinpoche's, the Kunzang Jamilang Lung, this precious human birth, it's rare. The precious human birth is rare, and equally rare is the number of people who somehow have a connection with the Buddha, even though they have this precious human life. He said it was like taking a handful of dried peas and throwing them on the side of a barn. The number of peas that stick, it's rare. And I realize, as time goes on, kind of my own kind of mistaken idea and enthusiasm. You come across the Dharma, and there can be such a sense of liberation and so wonderful, and you see yourself of somehow coming out of this, this angst and this struggle and this deep underlying feeling that really you're just sort of condemned. And to realize there's a path, there's tremendous feeling. It says in the long prayer to be reborn in Dewa Chen, it's like a vulture coming out of a net, And so you feel that, and you having come, you see yourself, your own shortcomings, and your own natural humility there, and you see if something like this can dawn in your mind. Well, it can in anybody's mind, and that's true. But we don't see the confusion of samsara. We don't see the incredible power of the ego clinging. And in a sense, you're not really recognizing the tremendous blessings that you've had by having, apparently random contacts with great teachers. It wasn't anything sought after, except in a very deep way, unrecognized, you might say. So there's a kind of humility when you realize. I know someone went to Rinpoche once when there were some troubles here, and was all upset and said, Rinpoche, people are leaving the Dharma Center. They're upset about stuff. They're leaving. And Rinpoche just said, people will do what people do. Here's this man who's liberating all. That's what he does. That's his only desire. And yet, skillful. You don't do where you can't do. Sometimes people have to work through their own things. And it's certainly that way with Dharma. So when we came across this book, The Tibetan Tradition of Mental Development, is way back early when we came across the Tibetans. It was just so stunning to me, the detail on bodhichitta and the kind of the purity of the teachings and the fact that it can be relied on. This is the thing. You see someone, these are the levels of faith, but you see a teacher and you're impressed by his or her qualities, and you say, gee, I'd like to have some of that too. How do I do that? And so that's this natural kind of progression. No one has to sell you with anything. It's your own experience. So, the teacher will say, well, do this, do that, do this, study this. And that kind of confidence gives you confidence, that kind of certainty, you might say, validity. It's always open and experiential, you might say, but at the same time, there's knowing, and then there's knowing that you know, and there's valid knowing. Khenpo Sherabodzer would say, I think he was kind of struck by this kind of fault in American Buddhism where, all sorts of people are excited about Dzogchen, rightfully they should be, but to the exclusion of bodhicitta. This is a huge mistake. You're not practicing Dzogchen, but nonetheless, with academic knowledge only and reading books and talking to each other and getting sort of inspiration from people who are kind of like half-baked, there's plenty of room for errors, all which will be corrected if people are sincere and just keep going. But Khenpo Sherabodzer would say, Dzogchen, that's very easy. You just have your mouth open and you stare up at the sky. For me, I can do that, but I can't do bodhicitta. It's very hard. What I like about it, though, is that it's completely relatable. It's not doing the sophistry of having some sort of esoteric word that people don't know the meaning of. And therefore you can kind of hide in other people's ignorance and hiding in your own ignorance. Whereas with bodhicitta, my goodness, first of all, just to consider all beings as having been your mother, all the earthworms, all the flies, all of that, you see again and again and again how limited our thinking is. And then what are we seeing? We see how it's all just filtering through this attachment to self. We just want to solidify the self, and we want to push away the fears, always keeping this self inviolate. But even that urge, if you go a step deeper, it shows you there's even wisdom there. We're trying to make something solid that isn't solid. So the fact that we recognize unconsciously that it's not solid, why do we need to make something solid if it's solid to begin with? So we have this feeling that it's not. It's this basic uncertainty that we have. I mean, it is amazing, you look around with, say, the tremendous wealth that some people have. And yet they're all out there fighting and struggling, and this one thing and the other thing, thrown off by some insult. I mean, you realize it's not the answer. So bodhicitta is spending so much on this chapter, and why? It's not mistaken. The Dalai Lama is not being politically correct when he says that Shantideva's Entering the Bodhisattva Path is his favorite book. There's just tremendous wisdom and help there. It's immediately relatable. You can read those texts, and are you in 37 Bodhisattva practices? Of course, some of them seem, kind of remarkable, but it shows you where you're not at, and that gives an immediate kind of humility. And what is humility? Humility is opening your heart. Instead of grabbing onto some concept or something that you think is yours, that you relate to, and closing around it so nobody can't touch it. We're just so completely upside down in our ordinary kind of graspings. And so this is also helpful because it's so relatable, it's so profound, it's so human, it's so here right now. Really wonderful. And of course we can rely on it. But to me, the idea that there is a path is just mind-bogglingly wonderful. Instead of that sense that you're lost and there's just no way out, it changes things. It changes things 100%. It's like if you're in Mammoth Cave, completely dark. Even the smallest spark changes the nature of that cave. There is light. And so too with us. We make mistakes in our practice, of course, because we're dealing in a dualistic state. We're dealing with less than full wisdom. But there's something that we can rely on. And even when we attach to it, that's a mistake. But this is self-perfecting. This is the path that's been laid out for all these years, century after century after century after century, because it works. It's so interesting that in science and in whatever, sociology, anything, people regard the latest book as being the most correct or the one that you should pay the most attention to. But in spiritual matters, it's different. It's like the old book has stood the test of time. And like the Dalai Lama said, yes, we have these 5 great afflictions, these kleshas. He says if scientist shows that there are 6, we would believe that. It's just a matter of getting it done. So it's not getting hung up in all this stuff, in the symbolism or anything. But what is the experience? What is the meaning of all of this? So there we go. So, bodhicitta.